Hello. So I'm reading The Seventh Most Important Thing. This is the 8th grade book. I'm just gonna start on chapter 1. Oop, let me just make sure my volume is up and you can hear me. Whoop, whoop. Okay. So we're on chapter 1. This is page 1. I'm gonna read a couple chapters and then I'll send it to you, Bella. All right. On a bitter November day in Washington, D.C., when everything felt metallic, when the sky was gray and the wind stung and the dry leaves were making death rattle sounds in the alleys, 13-year-old Arthur Owens picked up a brick from the corner of a crumbling building and threw it at an old man's head. Whew. It wasn't an accident. The brick didn't topple off the decrepit building. Decrepit means like falling apart. It didn't fall from the heavens. Arthur Owens grabbed the brick with his own hands. He held it for a minute, noticing the cold weight of it, and then he raised his arm and flung it at the old trash picker known as the junk man, who was pushing a rusty grocery cart down the street. That's going to happen a bunch. I apologize for the beeping, but it's going to happen a bunch. All right, we're on the third paragraph of the first page. Lucky for Arthur Owens, it was a windy day, and his ability to see things at a distance had never been good. Also, the front wheel of the grocery cart wobbled off the sidewalk at precisely the right moment. As the old man leaned to straighten the cart, Arthur's brick slammed into his shoulder, sending him crumpling to the ground and the grocery cart skidding into the street. So our main character is Arthur Owens. This takes place in Washington, D.C., and one day, Arthur gets mad, so he throws a brick at an old man, and we're going to figure out why he does this. He gets in trouble for it. So this old man is just collecting junk on the side of the street, and he gets a brick thrown at him, which is crazy. So, and he falls over, his cart falls over. So we're on the top of page 2. This is the second paragraph. If it hadn't been for the wind and the wobbly cart and Arthur's bad aim, it could have been a lot worse, everybody said. In the hospital later, the junk man told a newspaper reporter he believed it was an act of God. You being saved? The reporter asked, already jotting down the answer he expected to hear. No, was the junk man's odd reply, me being hit. Those were the facts. On November 9th, 1963, the story ran in all 3 of the city's newspapers. One headline read, 13-year-old boy attacks city man. Then in smaller type below, it said, man saved by Good Samaritan. So this story not only takes place in Washington, D.C., but it's in 1963, and we're in November, which is the fall. So this kid, Arthur, threw a brick at this old man, and now it's in the papers. Most people didn't care much about the facts, though. They didn't care about the particular place where the crime happened. Not a bad neighborhood, but not a good one either. Or how a newspaper delivery truck driver who'd taken a wrong turn spotted the injured man on the sidewalk and rushed him to a nearby hospital. So a random truck driver stopped and helped this man that got hit by the brick that Arthur, our main character, threw. What everybody wanted to know was why he threw this brick at this poor man. Arthur Owens spent 3 weeks in the juvenile detention home, better known as juvie, asking himself the same question. So Arthur, this 13-year-old boy who threw this brick, had to spend 3 weeks in juvie, which is basically like prison for kids or for underage kids. So like anyone under 18, if they committed a crime, they go to juvie. Okay, so now we're on chapter 2. A lot happened during the 3 weeks Arthur was locked up, the worst being that President Kennedy was killed. So this takes place, like I said, during 1963, and President Kennedy was killed at this time. I bet you can ask your parents about it, and they would know about it. So John F. Kennedy was a very beloved president, and he was in a parade, and it was, I forget what holiday it was. I think it was like towards Thanksgiving. But he was in a parade in a car, in an open convertible car, and he was driving with his wife, and a shooter shot him in the head and killed him. And this was on television, which is super messed up, and the whole country saw it. So this means like kids saw it, like everybody saw it. So it was a huge deal. So this happened in real life, but in this book, which is fiction, which is fake, Arthur, while he's in juvie, this is what's happening in the real world. Okay, let's keep going. A lot happened during the 3 weeks Arthur was locked up, the worst being that President Kennedy was killed. Then the guy who killed President Kennedy was killed, so then that guy got killed by somebody else. And then the Thanksgiving holiday passed by without much mention in juvie or anywhere else. Arthur didn't mind missing it. Along with the rest of the world, he didn't have much to be thankful for. So he spent Thanksgiving without his family. He was in juvie during this. 4 days after Thanksgiving, Arthur was brought to the courthouse for the hearing that would decide his fate. So when you go to jail or juvie or prison, you got to go to a hearing to see how long you're going to be in jail. He was seated in a long row of bad kids, so he figured it was going to be a while. Now we're on the third paragraph of page 3 on chapter 2. Unfortunately, the judge assigned to hear Arthur Owens' case was not a listening sort of man. Judge Philip Warner liked his billowy black robe and the sound of his own voice too much. He reminded Arthur of those big horseflies that get stuck in your window in the summertime and buzz like mad and won't quit no matter what you do. So already he doesn't like this judge, which isn't good because the judge is going to say how long he's going to be in juvie and like what his punishment for throwing this brick is at this man. We're on the top of page 4 now. As the morning dragged on, the temperature in the courtroom rose. If Arthur had ever wondered what the fires of hell were like, Judge Warner's courtroom was giving him a pretty good idea. People who had come in wearing their winter coats and wool suit jackets were down to their shirt sleeves. Arthur kept his suit jacket neatly buttoned and his sleeves down. He knew it was what his mom would want. Doing his best to stay awake, he tried to focus on the walls of the courtroom, which were covered with vertical panels of grooved wood. Arthur thought maybe the design was supposed to make the room appear sleek and modern, but the longer he stared at the panels, the more they seemed to ripple in sickening waves. He began to believe that even the walls had been designed as a kind of punishment. So he's so nervous about what this judge is going to say that he is feeling sick. And he's looking at the walls, and the walls are making him feel sick. The combination of all these things, the swimming walls, the heat, the sweat, and the judge's endless voice made him feel as if he just might puke when his turn finally came. Arthur T. Owens approached the bench, the bailiff called out. A bailiff is someone who helps the court process go along. They announce everything, come up to the stand. They kind of help everything move along in a courtroom. Excuse me. Bottom of page 4, second paragraph up. It was only a few steps from his chair to the judge's bench, but to Arthur it felt like miles. He could sense the breathing, sweaty mass of people behind him, the way you sense the weight of bullies right before they're about to smash you into a wall of lockers at school. There had been a lot of bullies in juvie. It was practically a bully vacation spot. No doubt some of the people in the courtroom were surprised to see what Arthur Owens looked like as he walked to the front. We're on the top of page 5 now. He wasn't your typical juvie thug. He didn't have meat slabs for hands or full facial hair or an insolent grin, so he doesn't look like your normal criminal would look. He looks like a normal kid, because he is. He thought he could hear a few whispers behind him. That's him. Arthur Owens was slender. He's thin, pale, and moody looking. Maybe he was a little taller than some 13-year-olds. His father had been tall, but mostly he was someone who wouldn't get noticed walking down the street. When his brown hair flopped over his eyes, Arthur had the bad habit of leaving it there, which drove his mother crazy. He also didn't smile much. As Arthur glanced nervously at the long row of juvenile delinquents, he could tell he was one of the youngest of all the young criminals waiting on the judge that day. And from what he could see, he was the only person who was wearing an almost new funeral suit that didn't fit him very well. All right. I think I'm going to be able to get through chapter 3, and then I'll probably need to make a new video. I think I'm also going to probably film myself while I read this during class. I think that would be smart. So now we're on chapter 3, and this is page 6. I hope I'm not being confusing, and I hope I'm like reading okay enough. Chapter 3, page 6. Judge Warner took a moment to study Arthur Owens when he reached the bench. It was his way of making the kids squirm. As the judge glared at him, Arthur tried to decide what to do with his hands and feet, which suddenly seemed to be completely useless objects. He crossed and uncrossed his arms, shifted from one foot to the other, and did his best to ignore the sickening flip-flopping in his stomach. Sweat made his undershirt stick to his back. The judge finally spoke after glancing down at a piece of paper handed to him by the bailiff. "You are Arthur Thomas Owens?" "Yes," Arthur thought he said. "I didn't hear you, young man." "Yes, Your Honor," Arthur replied, slightly louder. "Look up at me when you're speaking." So, like, you got to be nice to the judge. You got to say, please, thank you. You got to say, Your Honor, because they're deciding your fate. So, you know, it pays to be nice to the judge. So he at first doesn't say Your Honor, and the judge catches him on it quickly. He's like, "Excuse me, what did you say?" And he says, "Look up at me when you're speaking." So you want to give them eye contact, because this is a very honorable position judges are. You want to be nice to judges, especially if you're on trial for something. Top of page 7. Arthur swallowed. He hated looking at people when he was speaking. It made him feel like they could x-ray every thought in his head. Usually he had his hair to hide behind, but that morning his mother had taken a pair of scissors to the front of it. "To make you look less guilty," she'd told him. Arthur didn't think his hair had anything to do with his guilt, but there was nothing left now but a jagged fringe high above his forehead. He tugged at it with his fingers. "Okay," he mumbled, glancing up at the judge's thick round glasses and oddly magnified eyes, and looking back down at his feet. There was a long pause, as if the judge was trying to decide if he was entitled to more respect than he was getting. The room was quiet, expectant. When the judge's gaze finally returned to the paper in his hands, Arthur held back a loud sigh of relief. "According to what I've read about your case, I understand you attacked a man named James Hampton in a vicious and unprovoked manner on November 8th. Is that correct, Mr. Owens?" So unprovoked means that the guy did nothing to, have himself be attacked. So he did nothing to Arthur. Arthur just threw a brick at him, and it was unprovoked, which meant the guy didn't deserve it. He didn't do anything. Arthur blinked. We're at the bottom of page 7. Arthur blinked, momentarily confused by the name. James Hampton. Who was James Hampton? It took him a minute to figure out the judge was talking about the old junk man. Arthur tried not to look surprised by the fact that the man had a real name. Everybody had a name, of course, but he had to admit he'd never thought about the junk man having one. So everyone knows this guy just as the junk man, but guess what? He has a real name. He's a real human. He doesn't just collect trash. He couldn't recall anybody in the neighborhood ever using it. Top of page 8. Especially not a name as formal sounding as James Hampton, which could have belonged to a school principal or somebody's grandfather. It definitely didn't make Arthur feel any better about what he'd done. It also didn't make him feel better to find out that the junk man, James Hampton, had come to court that day to watch what happened. So this guy that he hit is there watching, what happens to Arthur. He was seated in the crowd only a few rows back from where Arthur stood. The judge pointed him out. A shocked breath caught in Arthur's throat. He didn't even look like the same person. So he's all instead of, looking like he usually does, collecting junk on the street, he's dressed up. So Arthur's like, whoa, this guy looks different. Middle of 8 now. The junk man's gray-white hair, usually disheveled, messy as disheveled, was now close-cut and carefully trimmed. He wasn't wearing his familiar raggedy clothes and foggy eyeglasses either. Instead, he had on a neatly pressed brown suit and striped orange tie. Somehow, he appeared taller and less crazy. But you couldn't miss the heavy white cast covering one arm and the sling of fabric that formed a triangle, almost like the letter A for Arthur, across the old man's chest. So this poor junk man has a sling, his arm's in a sling because of Arthur. Arthur threw this brick at him and it broke his arm. So he's like looking at this guy that he hurt, and he's got a cast on and a sling. And in the cast, Arthur can see an A. He's feeling so guilty that he can see like an A for Arthur in the cast. So his guilt is getting to him so much, he's like imagining there's an A for Arthur in his cast. We're at the bottom of 8 now. Arthur swallowed hard, staring at the cast, staring at what he'd done. The A seemed to get more visible, more accusing, the longer he stared at it. Mr. Owens, I'll repeat my question. Are you the one who attacked Mr. Hampton? Yes, sir, Arthur whispered. Then I want you to look at this innocent man you injured and quite frankly could have killed, the judge continued. There was a murmur of outraged agreement in the courtroom. And I want you to tell me what was going through your mind that afternoon, said the judge, his voice rising. He was proud of his intimidating, kid-shaking baritone. I want to know exactly what could have compelled you to throw a brick at Mr. Hampton as he was minding his own business walking down the street. Arthur was silent. He looked at his feet. The 2 long funeral pants made pools of black fabric over his polished shoes. He noticed how the orange carpet below them was nearly the same shade as the junk man's tie. He wondered if he'd be sentenced to jail for life if he refused to give a reason for what he'd done. So they're asking him, why did you throw this brick at this guy? Like, what could have compelled you to do that? So he's being asked this in court, and he's like, do I give an answer? I don't know. Middle of 9, like a little under the middle. Did you attack Mr. Hampton because he looked like a helpless old man? Pardon my choice of words. The judge added apologetically, glancing in the direction of the junk man. Did he seem like an easy target to you? No, sir, Arthur heard himself answer reluctantly. So it's not because he's an old man. Were you attempting to rob him? Arthur shook his head. Robbing the junk man would have been an almost funny statement in any other place, but he didn't dare laugh, not even inside his own head. Was it his color that caused you to attack him? So he's asking him, was it because he's a different race than you? Is that why you attacked him? Color? Confused, Arthur turned to look at the junk man. Top of 10. Again, not sure what color the judge was referring to. Was he talking about the white cast, the orange tie? The judge grew more impatient. I am asking you, young man, and this is a very serious question. Did you throw the brick at him because he is a black man? So we find out that James Hampton, aka the junk man, is a black man. So the judge asks Arthur, did you do this because he's black? And he's like, no, that's not why. What? Arthur's stomach gave a sickening lurch. This was a possibility, he'd never thought about, never in a million years considered. He could feel his heart thudding wildly, his mind racing. The junk man wasn't a color, he was just the junk man. But the man's skin was light brown, that was a fact. And Arthur's was peeled onion white. That was a fact, too. He'd just never put those 2 facts together. Arthur knew people's race was wasn't something you messed around with. There were marches and protests about it on television all the time. So this is 1963, so even back then there were protests and marches. Still today, there's still this going on, as I'm sure you've heard. And Arthur didn't even pay much attention to the news. Could the judge truly believe he'd been trying to stir up some kind of trouble by hitting the junk man? Although he had sworn to himself that he would say nothing, and he would never talk about what had made him so angry on that November afternoon, Arthur had no choice, so he has to come clean about why he did this. His father wouldn't have wanted him to stay silent and be accused of something far worse. So if he did this because of his race, that would have been really bad, right? So he has to tell the real reason why he did this. So Arthur licked his dry lips and spoke. Sorry, I just had a notification pop up about a meeting. We're almost done. Your Honor, this is the bottom of 10. He said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. It wasn't his color. The judge's reply was icy. Then what was it? Top of 11. Arthur knew the answer would sound crazy to everyone in the room. He knew no one would understand, and it would probably earn him a permanent bunk in juvie with nothing but olive green clothes and bad food and lukewarm showers for the rest of his life. Looking down at the floor, Arthur said in a barely audible voice, "It was because of his hat, Your Honor." While this might have seemed like a smart aleck answer to the judge, to the courtroom, and to anyone who heard it, it was, in fact, the truth. Arthur had thrown the brick because of a hat. So, that's where I'm going to stop right now, because I have a meeting in like 2 minutes. But this is exactly where your class is right now. 8A is on our starting chapter 4 tomorrow. So tomorrow I will plan on doing some more and filming and sending it to you guys. I hope this was helpful. I apologize if I went too fast or didn't make sense. And I hope you guys have a good night. And I hope this is helpful. And I will talk to you soon.